Soul Brew. Good morning, everyone. I hope you are doing well today and your souls have been brewing a lot of practice and wisdom and learning, new ideas and new commitments leading us up to Rosh Hashanah. So welcome to Soul Brew Season 2, where we bring curated voices from around the world, giving us inspiration and leading us through introspection, learning and guidance as we prepare in this week leading up to Rosh Hashanah, in this week of Slichot. So I'm Rabbi Bluth, host and producer of Soul Brew with Living Jewishly and Beth Tzedek Center for Spiritual Well-Being. And it's lovely to be back every morning to learn from wonderful artists and creatives and thinkers from all around the world. So this morning, I'm delighted to welcome Zoe Jick Fertik. Zoe's out in California, where she works for the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, in partnership with Bina, the Jewish movement for social change based in Israel. Zoe and I are good friends from Jaffa, and also her grandmother, Dorothy Zoltek, was a Yiddish teacher at Beth Tzedek, so she's got some roots here in Toronto. Zoe is a phenomenal teacher of Torah. She always asks these questions of what is the tradition here to teach us now, today? What's the hidden logic behind Torah readings and haftorah readings, so we can really understand what it is that we are cluing into. So Zoe, I'm delighted to welcome you, and I'm excited to hear what you have to share with us on the Torah and haftorah readings for Rosh Hashanah. What a treat it is to bring your voice to, I guess, back to the community in Toronto. Thank you for joining us, and tell us, leading up to the high holidays, what's your soul brewing?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Zoe Fertik, and leading up to the high holidays, my soul is brewing a reconsideration of the Torah readings for Rosh Hashanah. I'm thinking about going to Shul this year. It's not usually something I do on Rosh Hashanah, but it's been so long since I've gathered in a Jewish communal space, given the coronavirus pandemic, that I'm sort of tempted to go to Shul. And as I think about going to Shul for Rosh Hashanah this year, I am reconsidering what I'll hear the day of, on day 1 and on day 2, listening to the Torah and haftorah readings of Rosh Hashanah. Now, there's one really famous Torah reading for Rosh Hashanah. It actually comes on day 2, and that's the story of the Akedah. And I've long wondered why the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, such a horrific, gruesome, controversial story, would be chosen as the Torah reading for the beginning of the Jewish New Year. And especially, I grew up Reform, and my family only went to Shul really on Rosh Hashanah. We only went to synagogue really once a year. So the only Torah reading I would hear in any given Jewish year was this horrible, disturbing story of Abraham sacrificing his son. So this year, as I consider going to Shul, I wanted to reconsider what it is about the Akedah that makes this an apt Torah reading for the high holiday season. And more importantly, what else are we reading from the Torah on Rosh Hashanah and why? Now, it's an interesting question, I think, because what we don't read on Rosh Hashanah is we don't hear a Torah reading about, let's say, the creation of the world. You might have thought that on this new year, on this birthday anniversary of the creation of the world, the appropriate Torah reading to hear in synagogue would be Genesis chapter 1. That would make sense, but that's not what we read. You also might have thought that we might read the Torah portions that include a description of Rosh Hashanah and how we might celebrate this new year, blowing the shofar and resting. And we do get a little bit of that reading from Numbers chapter 29 as an afterthought, as just this little epilogue to the Torah reading, but it is not the star of the show. No, in fact, we get a compilation of Torah readings that I think are pretty unexpected for this high holiday New Year season. So let me show you what it is that we actually do read on Rosh Hashanah. Here are the Torah readings and haftorah readings for Rosh Hashanah. On day 1, we get Genesis chapter 21 with a haftorah follow-up of 1 Samuel chapter 1. On day 2, we get Genesis chapter 22, that's the famous Akedah story, with a haftorah follow-up of Jeremiah chapter 31. Now, what are these readings? Why are they paired? And why are they corresponding to this high holiday season? What is it that our tradition wants us to know and wants us to feel as we sit in synagogue and listen to Genesis 21, followed by 1 Samuel 1, and then Genesis 22, followed by Jeremiah 31? What is the hidden logic of these Torah readings and haftorah readings for Rosh Hashanah? So let's start with the first one. What happens in Genesis chapter 21? Genesis chapter 21 is the moment when God remembers our foremother Sarah and gifts her a child that she has been long wanting. And in her old age, she gives birth to a son, Isaac. Now, this is noteworthy because Sarah has been barren for most of her life, and it didn't seem likely that she was going to get a child. And in Genesis chapter 21, God fulfills his promise to Sarah and actually does help her get pregnant and give birth to the son, Isaac. We follow this Torah reading with a haftorah reading from 1 Samuel 1, which is actually a relatively similar story when you look at it. This is a story about Hannah, the mother of Samuel. And Hannah, similarly to Sarah, had been barren, had been praying to God to help her get pregnant. And finally, in the first chapter of Samuel 1, God remembers Sarah, a very similar language to what we heard in Genesis 21. God remembers Hannah. I meant Hannah. God remembers Hannah. And just like God remembers Sarah, Hannah gives birth to a son named Samuel, meaning I asked the Lord for him. Okay, so what is it about these barren, miraculous birth stories that make them appropriate for the first day of Rosh Hashanah? Well, if you think about it, what is Rosh Hashanah really about? Rosh Hashanah is about celebrating God's creation of the world. It is the world's birthday. It is a beginning of a new year, which is celebrated on the anniversary of God's creation of the world. Hayom Harat Haolam. This is the day the world was created, we say during Rosh Hashanah. And so that is what we are celebrating. This is the beginning of a new year, celebrated on the anniversary of the day that God created the world. If human beings are created in the divine image, then what makes us mini divine beings like God is our capacity to be creators as well. Can we create something just like God did? God's ultimate first act, the way that we get to know God at first in our story, is through God's being a creator, creating the world. And if we can emulate God in any way, it's through being creators as well. And obviously, one of the most sort of from the get-go, most inherent to our human capacity way of being creators is our ability to reproduce, our ability to create new life. And that is what these stories are really about. If we celebrate on Rosh Hashanah God's creation of the world, then we too want to celebrate our possibility to be like God and to be like creators ourselves. And Sarah and Hannah are two of our biblical heroines who so desperately want to be creators. And that creation does not come easy for them. But in order for them to be full divine beings, they want to be able to create new life just like God did, just like we're celebrating God's doing on Rosh Hashanah. And so on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we celebrate the ability for humans to bear new life and to give creation a new chance ongoing and ongoing and ongoing through the creation of new life through our children. So Sarah and Hannah represent our ability to be like God in our ways of being creators, just like God did on the first day of the world. And so really interestingly, at least for me, it's so meaningful to think that when we sit in synagogue on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we don't read about men going out and, creating, whatever they feel like creating. We read about two women who emulate God by creating new life. It is, I think, such a feminist statement to say that the women are the ultimate godlike creatures in our ability to create new life and to be like God on Rosh Hashanah, creating whole new worlds with each new person that we bring into the world that God created and that we are celebrating today. But not so fast, because Rosh Hashanah is not just a birthday party. It is not just a celebration. It's a time of solemnity. It's a serious time when we are aware that our fate is in the balance. And we're entering day one might be a birthday party, but day two enters us into a period of 10 days of awe when we are ushered into a 10-day series of, forgiveness and apology and reflection. And it is a difficult time. So if day one is celebrating our ability to create life, day two of Rosh Hashanah enters us into the 10 days of awe when we are aware just how precious life is and how quickly life can be taken away. And yet, our Torah readings give us a little bit of hope, because our Torah readings for day two, the Torah reading and the haftorah reading, are about exactly that. If on day one we so desperately wished and prayed for new life and our ability to have children, day two gives us two stories of those children's lives being threatened. The story of the Akedah is a story of, yes, you got Isaac, but Isaac's life is not guaranteed just because you gave birth to him. The sacrifice of Isaac, the binding of Isaac, the Akedah is a story where we're supposed to learn, yes, you have the ability to bring new life into this world. And Isaac is representative of God's remembering Sarah and allowing her to get pregnant and give birth. But now Isaac's life is in the balance. Isaac's fate still has to be determined. Thank God, at the end of this story, Abraham is not required to sacrifice his own son. And so there is some version of a happy ending to this story. And we, reading this story, hope that our children too, even if their lives, chas v'chalila, come into danger and are threatened, that they too will come out the other side. But we are aware on day two of Rosh Hashanah that these lives are vulnerable. All of our lives are vulnerable. Yes, we are able to create new life, but that life is not then guaranteed for all time. But we also then read a haftorah from the book of Jeremiah, which is a story about Rachel, another one of our matriarchs who had trouble getting pregnant. And the prophet Jeremiah imagines Rachel at the end of days. She's already died. This is her sort of ghost looking down from heaven. And her children, her descendants, generations later, have been exiled from Jerusalem. And Rachel is watching her children, her tribe, walk out of Jerusalem toward their exile. And she's crying. A cry is heard in Ramah, wailing, bitter weeping. Rachel weeping for her children. Once again, we may be able to create new life and to have children, but who knows how those lives will unfold? They might be filled with pain and sorrow and exile. She refuses to be comforted, this mother, because her children are gone. But Jeremiah quotes God speaking, and Jeremiah says, "Please, Rachel, restrain your voice from weeping, your eyes from shedding tears. There is reward. Your children shall return from the enemy's land." Just like in the Akedah story, the lives of these long wanted and prayed for children, Isaac and Rachel's children, the tribes of Benjamin. Yes, they've long been wanted, and yes, we got them, but their lives are vulnerable. They might be up for sacrifice. They may be vulnerable to exile. But don't worry, says God. I won't make you sacrifice your child. Don't worry, says God. Your children will return from exile. They will return from the enemy's land, and they will come back to the land of Israel one day. There is a hopeful ending at the end of all of this, says Genesis 22 and Jeremiah 31. So what does this all mean? Rosh Hashanah is a celebration of the creation of the world. On day one, we have a party and we say, happy birthday, world. We too can be creators. We too can create whole new worlds. We will have children. It might be difficult to have them, but we can be like God and we can have children too. We can be creators. On this day of the celebration of the creation of the world, we will read stories of our own ability to be creators as well. Day two, it ushers us into a new period of time, 10 days of awe, when we are aware that just because we can create new life does not mean that that life is going to be easy. It does not mean that this year is going to bring us what we want. But Genesis 22 and Jeremiah 31 says, yes, life is hard. Life is full of pain, but there's reward at the end. You will not have to sacrifice your son, Isaac. Your children will return from exile. These are 10 days of awe. This is going to be hard. You might be entering a year full of sorrow. But, says our Torah readings, it's going to be okay. We're going to come out the other side of this. So get prepared. You too can create whatever type of life you want this year, and it's going to be okay in the end. It might be hard, but it's going to be okay. Shana Tova. I hope that you hear the Torah readings and the haftorah readings with new ears this year, and that wherever you are listening, wherever you are reading, that these Torah readings can have a new meaning for you as you hear these words linked together by years of tradition and think, why do we read these? What are they trying to teach me today? And what hope can I glean from these readings as I enter a new year, which I hope will bring me nothing but blessing. Shana Tova.
Ba-da-da.